47 people screamed under Nathan's knife. 12 died. The rest carried scars until the day they were buried, and Charleston's wealthiest families never knew. They trusted his hands to cut into their wives, their daughters, their sons. They thought they were being treated by Dr. Edmund Hartwell, one of South Carolina's finest surgeons. But it was Nathan who did the cutting, Nathan who pulled organs aside, Nathan who stitched wounds closed, Nathan whose hands had practiced first on people who could not refuse. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from? What time is it in your city? Because what happened in Charleston between 1844 and 1858 was deliberately erased from medical records for almost 80 years. And I want to know how far this truth travels. If you want the stories they tried to bury, hit subscribe. This channel digs into the darkness textbook skip. When those sealed documents were finally opened in 1921, they found surgical records with Nathan's handwriting. 47 operations, 12 deaths. Not a single mention of his name in any published journal. August 17, 1844. Charleston Slave Market on Chalmers Street. 6 in the morning. The holding pens were full. 200 people waiting to be sold. They stood on wooden platforms in rows, wrists chained, while buyers circled below. Plantation owners, overseers, traders. They checked teeth, felt muscle, asked about work history. The enslaved people stood still and let it happen. Resistance meant the whip. Dr. Edmund Hartwell arrived at 8:15. 41 years old, clean-shaven, thin-faced. The kind of man who looked like he spent his time indoors thinking about complicated things. He had a medical practice on Meeting Street and taught anatomy at the Medical College of South Carolina 3 mornings a week. He was respected, trusted, desperate. The college needed bodies, not cadavers. Living bodies to practice surgery on. You cannot learn to cut into a breathing person by cutting into a corpse. Dead flesh does not bleed right, does not fight back when you make a mistake. In 1844, anesthesia was barely used in the South. Patients felt everything. Surgeons needed hands that did not shake under screaming. The only way to develop that was practice. And the only way to practice without legal consequences was to practice on people who had no standing to sue. Hartwell walked past 3 rows without stopping. He was looking for someone specific, young, healthy, intelligent, someone whose hands stayed steady. He found Nathan in the 4th row, 23 years old, 5'10", light brown skin, no visible scars. The auction record said he could read. That was illegal, but valuable. It said he had medical experience, helping with childbirths, treating fevers, mixing remedies. Hartwell climbed onto the platform. Nathan kept his eyes down. That was the rule. "Look at me," Hartwell said. Nathan raised his eyes, dark brown, steady, no fear, no anger, just watchful quiet. "How did you learn medicine?" Hartwell asked. "Previous owner's wife was sickly," Nathan said. "I helped care for her, pick things up. Have you seen a surgery?" "Yes, sir. Leg amputation, wagon accident. Did the blood bother you?" "No, sir. Did the screaming bother you?" Nathan paused. "The man lived," he said. Hartwell smiled. That was the right answer. "Hold out your hands." Nathan extended both arms, large hands, long fingers, smooth palms except for small calluses near the thumbs, not field worker hands. These had done delicate work. Hartwell gripped Nathan's wrist and felt the pulse. Steady, strong. The fingers did not tremble. Hartwell turned to the auctioneer. "How much?" 900, 700. They settled on 800 cash. By 9:07, Nathan belonged to Edmund Hartwell. They left in a black carriage. Nathan sat in back while Hartwell rode up front. The carriage rolled north on Meeting Street through Charleston. Big houses with columns, wide streets lined with palmetto trees. It looked peaceful. Nathan knew better. The carriage stopped at a 3-story brick house. Brass plate beside the door read, Dr. Edmund Hartwell, physician and surgeon. Hartwell told Nathan to follow him inside. They went through the front door, down a hallway, past a sitting room and study, stopped at a door at the end. Hartwell opened it. The room was 15 by 20 feet, high ceiling, 2 tall windows covered with thick curtains. In the center stood a wooden table about 6 feet long with leather straps bolted to each corner. Against the far wall was a cabinet filled with surgical instruments, knives of different sizes, bone saws, metal clamps, needles and thread, bottles of alcohol. Another cabinet held bandages and silk sutures. This is the operating room, Hartwell said. You will spend most of your time here. Nathan looked at the table, at the straps, at the dark stains soaked into the wood. Hartwell walked to the instrument cabinet and took out a scalpel. Small knife with a curved blade about 3 inches long. He held it up so Nathan could see the edge. This is a scalpel. Surgeons use it to open the body, to access what is inside, to remove what should not be there. He set it down and picked up a larger knife with a straight blade. This is an amputation knife used for cutting through muscle and skin, not bone. For bone, you need a saw. He turned to face Nathan. I am going to teach you surgery. You are going to learn how to cut into a living human body without killing the patient. Do you understand? Yes, sir. You will do exactly as I instruct. You will not speak unless asked. You will not hesitate. If you refuse or fail, I will have you whipped and sold to a rice plantation where you will work in water until malaria kills you. Do you understand? Yes, sir. The medical college trains 40 students every year. They need to practice surgery. We cannot practice on white people because they will sue. We cannot rely only on cadavers because dead tissue behaves differently. So we practice on enslaved people. People who cannot sue. People who have no legal rights. People like you. Nathan felt his stomach tighten. You will assist me in performing experimental surgeries on enslaved people brought here by their owners. I will rent them for procedures. I pay the owners a fee. If the patient survives, the owner gets their property back. If the patient dies, the owner accepts the loss. You will do the cutting under my supervision. If you succeed, you continue. If you fail too many times, I replace you. Nathan stared at the instruments. He thought about running. But where? Charleston was surrounded by slave patrols. No free papers. They would catch him within a day. And even if he escaped, Hartwell would just buy someone else to stand here. When do we start? Nathan asked. Tomorrow. Tonight you read this. He handed Nathan a thick leather-bound book. Elements of Anatomy by Jones Quain. Nathan opened it. Detailed illustrations of the human skeleton. Bones labeled in Latin. You cannot read Latin. No, sir. You will learn? 6 months to learn enough medical Latin to follow surgical texts. If you cannot, I sell you and find someone else. Hartwell led Nathan upstairs to a small room on the 3rd floor. Narrow bed, wooden chair, one window overlooking the street. This is where you sleep. You will not leave this house without permission. You will not speak to anyone about what we do. If you break these rules, I will have you publicly whipped and sold out of state. Understand? Yes, sir. Hartwell left and locked the door. Nathan sat on the bed holding the anatomy book. He opened it and stared at the drawings, the intricate ribs, the delicate hand bones. the spines curve. He tried to memorize shapes, tried not to think about what these bones looked like inside a screaming person. He did not sleep. He sat by the window watching Charleston in darkness. Carriages passed. People walked in pairs. Gas lamps flickered. The city looked calm. But Nathan knew what happened behind closed doors. Next morning, Hartwell unlocked the door at 6:30. Nathan was already awake with the anatomy book open. Hartwell asked if he learned anything. Nathan said he memorized 32 bones. Hartwell tested him. Nathan got 30 correct. Hartwell looked satisfied. They went downstairs. Hartwell told Nathan to put on a canvas apron. It was stiff with old bloodstains, brown and black, some shaped like handprints. Nathan tied it around his waist. "Today you observe," Hartwell said. "Tomorrow you assist. Next week you cut." Someone knocked. Hartwell told Nathan to stay while he answered. Nathan heard voices. 2 men. One Hartwell. The other had a rough accent. They argued about money. Hartwell agreed to something. The voices came closer. Hartwell entered, followed by a tall man in dirty clothes who smelled like tobacco and sweat. Behind them was a woman, about 30, thin, dark skin, her wrists tied with rough rope, her eyes wide and darting like a trapped animal. "This is Clara," Hartwell said. "She belongs to Mr. Robbins. We will be removing a tumor from her neck. The tumor is not life-threatening, but it reduces her value. If we succeed, Robbins gets a more valuable worker. If we fail, he has agreed not to pursue legal action for a reduced fee." Hartwell turned to Robbins. "Wait in the front room." Robbins left. Hartwell closed and locked the door. He turned to Clara. "Lie down." Clara did not move. She was shaking. Hartwell repeated louder, "Lie down on the table." Clara climbed onto the table. Her whole body trembled. Hartwell strapped her wrists, then her ankles, pulled the straps tight until leather bit into skin. Clara started crying. Silent tears ran down her face into her hair. Hartwell told Nathan to stand right beside the table. Nathan stepped forward. He looked down at Clara's face. She looked back. Her eyes locked onto his. For just a moment there was recognition, a silent question. "Are you going to help me, or are you one of them?" Nathan looked away. Hartwell touched a swelling on Clara's neck about the size of a walnut. "The tumor is here. Benign, filled with fluid and fatty tissue. We make an incision across it. Open the skin, locate the tumor, cut it free. Stitch closed. Should take 15 to 20 minutes. "What about pain medicine?" Nathan asked. Hartwell looked at him like he asked something stupid. "We do not waste ether on practice surgeries. She will feel everything. That is part of the lesson. Real surgery is not clean or quiet. You need to learn to work while the patient screams and thrashes. If you cannot, you are useless." Hartwell picked up the scalpel, positioned himself beside Clara's head, placed his left hand on her shoulder. Then he pressed the blade against her neck and cut. Clara screamed. The sound tore through the room, high, sharp, full of animal terror. Hartwell ignored it. He drew the scalpel across the tumor in one smooth motion. Blood welled up and spilled down her neck onto the table. Darker than Nathan expected. Thicker. It pooled in her collarbone and dripped onto the floor. Hartwell wiped blood away with a cloth, made a second cut perpendicular to the first. Cross-shaped opening. Clara thrashed against the restraints. Leather creaked. Table rocked. Hartwell told Nathan to hold her head still. Nathan stepped forward, placed both hands on either side of Clara's face, her skin burning hot and slick with sweat. He felt her pulse hammering under his palms like a frantic drumbeat. Clara tried to turn away, but Nathan held firm. If she moved, the knife might slip, might cut something vital, might kill her. Hartwell inserted a metal clamp into the wound and pulled back skin edges. Nathan could see inside now, yellow fat glistening, dark red muscle fibers. The pale round tumor nestled between tissue layers. Blood kept flowing, ran down Clara's neck and soaked into the table wood. The smell hit Nathan, copper and salt and something else, something raw. Hartwell switched to a smaller knife and began cutting around the tumor. Clara screamed again. The sound turned into a long, wailing cry that did not stop. It filled the room until Nathan could not hear anything else. Just that sound and Clara's face under his hands and Hartwell's knife moving deeper. Blood splattered onto Nathan's apron, onto his hands, warm and sticky. He wanted to pull away, wanted to run, but he did not move. He held Clara's head still and stared at a spot on the wall behind Hartwell and tried to make his mind go somewhere else. Hartwell cut deeper. The tumor came free with a wet sucking sound. He lifted it out and dropped it into a metal bowl. It landed with a soft thud. Clara's screaming turned into ragged sobbing. The wound was still open, blood pouring. Hartwell picked up a curved needle threaded with black silk. He began stitching. Each time the needle pierced skin, Clara jerked and cried out. Nathan felt every movement through his hands, felt her trying to escape, failing. Hartwell worked methodically, in and out, pull tight, tie off, 9 minutes to close the wound. When he finished, he stepped back. The stitches were uneven. The wound puckered. Blood seeped from 2 spots where needle holes were too large. "Acceptable but not ideal," Hartwell said. "We will do better next time." He cleaned the wound with alcohol and wrapped a bandage around Clara's neck. Undid the restraints. Clara lay motionless, her eyes open but unfocused, breathing wrong, too fast, too shallow. Hartwell told Nathan to help her to the front room. Nathan put his arm under Clara's shoulders and lifted. She was completely limp, dead weight. He half-carried her to where Robbins waited by the door smoking. Robbins looked at Clara's bandaged neck and nodded like inspecting repaired equipment. He paid Hartwell $20 and left, with Clara stumbling behind him. Nathan went back to the operating room. The table was covered in blood. It had run off the edges and pooled on the floor. Hartwell was cleaning instruments in a basin. "What did you think?" Hartwell asked. Nathan looked at his hands, stained red, under his fingernails, in the creases of his palms. He could still feel Clara's pulse hammering. "She will survive," Nathan said quietly. Hartwell shook his head. "Surviving is not the same as succeeding. The stitches will scar ugly. That reduces her value. We need to do better. You need to do better." Nathan understood. Next time he would hold the knife. Next time he would cut while someone screamed. Next time the blood would be on his hands differently. That night Nathan sat alone in his room. He could still hear Clara's screams, still feel her trying to pull away. He looked at his hands in dim light from the window. He had scrubbed 3 times, but could still see traces of blood in the lines of his palms. He started counting then. 1 surgery, 1 woman. He did not know why. Maybe because numbers felt solid when nothing else did. Maybe because keeping track was the only control he had left. 1 surgery. He whispered it in darkness. There would be 46 more. Nathan held the scalpel for the first time on September 3rd, 1844. 17 days after Clara. His hand did not shake. That was the problem. It should have. But when Hartwell placed the knife in Nathan's palm and told him to make the first incision, Nathan's fingers closed around the handle with the steadiness of someone who had done this 100 times before. He had not. This was surgery number 8. A man named Joseph, 42 years old, owned by a tobacco merchant in Georgetown. The tumor was on his shoulder, benign but growing. Hartwell stood beside Nathan and watched. "Cut here," Hartwell said. He traced a line across the tumor with his finger. 3 inches, clean and straight. Nathan pressed the blade against Joseph's skin. Joseph was awake, strapped to the table. His eyes locked onto Nathan's face. There was no recognition there, no silent question like Clara had asked, just resignation, like Joseph had already accepted what was about to happen. Nathan cut. The skin split open. Blood welled up dark and thick. Joseph screamed, but the sound was different from Clara's. Lower, more guttural, like it came from somewhere deeper than his throat. Nathan did not look away. He wiped the blood with a cloth and made the second cut. Cross pattern, opening the tissue, exposing what lay beneath. "Deeper," Hartwell said. "You need to reach the tumor base." Nathan cut deeper. His hands moved with precision, with certainty, like they had been designed for this exact purpose. And that was when Nathan realized something terrible. He was good at this, not just competent. Good. His fingers knew where to press, where to pull, how much pressure to apply without tearing tissue. It came naturally, like breathing. The tumor came out clean. Nathan stitched the wound closed. 12 stitches, even and tight. When he finished, Hartwell examined the work and nodded. "Much better than Clara," he said. "This will scar, but not badly. You may have a gift for this." Nathan looked down at his hands. They were covered in Joseph's blood. He felt nothing. That was worse than feeling sick, worse than feeling guilty. He felt nothing at all. That was surgery number 8. There would be 39 more. But between 8 and 47, something changed in Nathan. Something broke, or maybe it did not break. Maybe it just transformed into something harder, something that could survive what was coming. 1846. 2 years into Nathan's service. Hartwell received a letter from the Medical College of South Carolina. They wanted to rent Nathan for teaching purposes. 3 days a week. Hartwell would receive $50 per month. Nathan would assist in experimental surgeries performed in front of medical students. The procedures would be more complex, more dangerous. The college had secured a steady supply of subjects. Enslaved people whose owners agreed to lease them for medical experimentation in exchange for reduced medical fees or cash payments. Hartwell accepted. He told Nathan the news over breakfast one morning in March. "You will begin at the college next week," Hartwell said. "Professor Edmund Dawson will supervise you. He teaches surgical technique. You will do exactly as he instructs. These surgeries will be observed by 40 students. You will not speak. You will not hesitate. You will cut when told to cut. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Nathan said. The Medical College of South Carolina was a 3-story building on Queen Street, stone facade, tall windows. Inside it smelled like formaldehyde and old books. Professor Dawson was 60 years old with white hair and hands that trembled slightly when he held a pen. But when he held a scalpel, his hands went perfectly still. The operating theater was on the 2nd floor, a circular room with tiered seating arranged in concentric rings around a central table. The table was wooden, stained dark with old blood, leather restraints at each corner. Above the table hung an oil lamp that cast harsh shadows across everything. The students sat in the tiered seats taking notes. 40 young white men in dark suits. They watched Nathan the way you watch a trained animal perform tricks. The first surgery at the college was on March 19, 1846. A woman named Sarah, 19 years old, owned by a rice planter from Edisto Island. She had a vesico-vaginal fistula, a tear in the tissue between the bladder and birth canal, caused by a difficult childbirth 6 months earlier. The condition made her leak urine constantly, made her smell, made her worthless to her owner. The owner agreed to let the college experiment on her. If they fixed the problem, he would pay them. If they failed, he would accept the loss. "This will be a teaching surgery," Professor Dawson announced to the students. "The procedure is experimental. Dr. Marion Sims in Alabama has attempted this repair 17 times with limited success. We will attempt a variation of his technique. Nathan will perform the surgery under my guidance. You will observe and take notes." Sarah lay on the table, awake, terrified, her wrists and ankles strapped tight. Dawson explained the procedure to the students. He used a metal speculum to show them the fistula, pointed out the torn tissue, explained how they would clean the edges of the tear and stitch them together using silver wire instead of silk thread. Silver was less likely to cause infection, less likely to dissolve. "Nathan, begin," Dawson said. Nathan inserted the speculum. Sarah cried out. The metal was cold and unforgiving. It held her open while Nathan worked. He could see the fistula clearly now, a hole about the size of a dime, ragged edges, inflamed tissue. "Clean the edges first," Dawson instructed. "Remove any dead tissue. Make the edges fresh so they will heal together." Nathan used a small curved knife to scrape away the damaged tissue. Blood filled the speculum. Sarah screamed. Her whole body convulsed against the restraints. The leather creaked. The table shook. Nathan kept working. His hands did not stop, did not hesitate. He cleaned one edge, then the other. The students leaned forward in their seats, pens scratching on paper, recording every detail. "Now suture," Dawson said. "Use the silver wire. Pass it through both sides of the tear. Pull tight. Tie off." Nathan threaded the silver wire through a curved needle. He pierced one edge of the fistula, then the other. Pulled the wire tight. The edges came together. Sarah's screaming turned into a high, keening wail that echoed off the theater walls. Nathan tied off the wire and cut it. Started the next suture, then the next. 7 sutures total, each one pulling the torn tissue back together. When Nathan finished, Dawson examined the repair. "Good," he said. "Now we wait. If the tissue heals without infection, the fistula will close. If not, we will try again." They unstrapped Sarah and took her to a recovery room in the basement. Nathan cleaned the instruments while the students filed out. Professor Dawson stayed behind. "You have steady hands," Dawson said. "Better than most surgeons I have trained. Where did you learn to work through screaming?" "Practice," Nathan said quietly. Dawson nodded. "That is what separates good surgeons from mediocre ones. The ability to ignore suffering long enough to complete the task. Most men cannot do it. Their hands shake. Their resolve falters. But you seem to have no such limitations." Nathan said nothing. Dawson left. Nathan stood alone in the empty theater looking at the blood-stained table. He thought about what Dawson had said. The ability to ignore suffering. Was that what Nathan had developed? The ability to stop seeing people as people? To see them only as problems to solve, flesh to repair, tasks to complete. Sarah's fistula did not heal. The silver wire caused infection. The tissue broke down. The repair failed after 6 days. Sarah was brought back to the operating theater. Nathan performed the surgery again. Same procedure, different technique. This time they tried silk thread instead of wire. The repair held for 9 days before failing. They tried a third time. Failed. Fourth time. Failed. Fifth time. Failed. Sarah endured 32 surgeries over 4 years. Nathan performed every single one. Each time the fistula would appear to heal, then reopen. The tissue was too damaged, too scarred. It would not hold. On the 33rd surgery, Sarah died, not from the procedure itself, from infection that spread through her body. She developed a fever on the 2nd day after surgery. By the 5th day, she was delirious. By the 8th day, she was dead. Nathan was the one who carried her body to the dissection room. The medical students needed cadavers to practice on. Sarah would serve that purpose now. Nathan laid her on the dissection table and covered her with a sheet. He stared at her face. She looked peaceful. Finally. He walked back to Hartwell's house that evening and sat in his room. He took out a small notebook he kept hidden under his mattress. Inside were marks, tallies, lines scratched with a piece of charcoal. He added 33 marks, one for each surgery on Sarah. Then he added a circle around them. That meant death. He now had 68 total marks in the notebook, 68 surgeries, 8 circles, 8 deaths. He whispered the count to himself. 68 surgeries, 8 deaths. 32 of those were just one woman. One woman who died slowly over 4 years, while Nathan cut into her again and again, trying to fix something that could not be fixed. That night, Nathan dreamed about Sarah. In the dream, she sat up on the dissection table and asked him why he did not just let her die the first time. "Why did you keep trying?" she asked. "You knew it would not work. Why did you keep cutting me open?" Nathan had no answer. He woke up in darkness with sweat soaking through his shirt. His hands were shaking. That had not happened in years. He clenched them into fists and counted to 100 until they went still again. The surgeries continued. Nathan became a fixture at the medical college. 3 days a week, sometimes 4. The students began to recognize him. They called him the surgeon's hands, never by name, just the hands, like he was a tool, an instrument, not a person. The procedures varied: tumor removals, hernia repairs, amputations, experimental techniques for repairing damaged organs, procedures that had never been attempted before. Some worked, most did not. The subjects were always the same: enslaved people, always awake, always screaming, always strapped to the table while Nathan cut into them. By 1850, Nathan had performed 119 surgeries. 12 people had died. The others survived but carried scars, physical and otherwise. Nathan carried his own scars, not on his skin, somewhere deeper, in the part of himself that used to feel things like guilt and horror and shame. That part had calcified, hardened into something impenetrable. He needed it to. Otherwise, he could not have continued. But there was something else growing in that hardened place, something Nathan did not fully understand yet, a kind of cold rage, not hot and explosive, cold and calculating. It started as a question, a quiet voice in the back of his mind that asked, what would happen if Nathan made a mistake on purpose? What would happen if his steady hands suddenly were not so steady? What would happen if a white patient ended up on his table and Nathan had the opportunity to make one small error, one tiny miscalculation that looked like an accident but was not? Nathan pushed the thought away. It was too dangerous, too risky, but it did not go away. It stayed there in the back of his mind, waiting, growing stronger with every surgery, with every scream, with every death. 1852, 8 years into Nathan's service. Professor Dawson died of a stroke. He was replaced by Dr. Walter Pierce. Pierce was younger, 43, ambitious. He wanted to make a name for himself in surgical medicine. He had an idea, a proposal. He came to Hartwell's house to discuss it. Nathan listened from the hallway outside Hartwell's study. "I want to expand Nathan's role," Pierce said. "He has proven himself capable. More than capable. His technique is better than most trained surgeons. I propose we begin using him for more than just experimental procedures on enslaved subjects. I propose we begin using him for actual medical practice." "What do you mean?" Hartwell asked. "I mean we bring Nathan to treat white patients. In their homes. He will wear simple clothes. Enter through the back door. He will not speak. He will simply assist. But in reality, he will do most of the actual surgical work. You and I will supervise. We will take credit. But Nathan will be the one cutting." Hartwell was quiet for a moment. "That is risky," he said. "If anyone discovered the truth." "They will not," Pierce said. "White patients do not look closely at servants. They will see you standing over the patient. They will assume you are doing the work. Nathan will simply be your assistant, an extra pair of hands, nothing more." "And what do we gain from this?" Hartwell asked. "Reputation," Pierce said, "and money. We can take on more patients, more complex cases. Cases other surgeons refuse because they are too difficult. With Nathan's skill, we can succeed where others fail. We will become known as the finest surgeons in Charleston." Hartwell agreed. The arrangement began in June of 1852. Nathan was 31 years old. He had been cutting into people for 8 years. Now he would begin cutting into white people, people who would never know that the hands that saved them belonged to someone they considered property. The first white patient was a woman named Margaret Rutledge, wife of a prominent cotton merchant. She had a tumor in her abdomen, large, growing. Other surgeons had refused the case. Too risky, too complex. Hartwell and Pierce accepted. They arrived at the Rutledge mansion on a Tuesday afternoon. 3-story house, white columns, immaculate gardens. Nathan entered through the back door carrying a leather bag of surgical instruments. He wore plain, dark clothes, kept his eyes down. A servant showed him to a second-floor bedroom where Margaret lay in bed, surrounded by family. Hartwell and Pierce stood at the bedside explaining the procedure. Nathan stood in the corner, invisible. When the family left, Hartwell turned to Nathan. "You know what to do," he said. Nathan opened the instrument bag and prepared the tools. They moved Margaret to a table they had set up in the center of the room, strapped her down. Hartwell held a cloth soaked in ether over her face. She breathed it in and went unconscious. This was different from the surgeries at the college. White patients got anesthesia. They did not have to feel the knife. Nathan made the first incision, a long cut from sternum to navel. Blood welled up. He used clamps to hold the incision open, reached inside, felt for the tumor, found it attached to the intestines, large, maybe 6 inches across. He would have to cut it free without damaging the surrounding organs. He worked slowly, methodically. Hartwell and Pierce stood on either side of him watching, occasionally giving instructions, but mostly just watching. Because Nathan did not need instructions. He knew what to do. His hands knew. The tumor came out intact. Nathan sutured the intestines where he had cut, then closed the abdominal incision layer by layer, muscle, fascia, skin. When he finished, Hartwell checked his work and nodded. "Perfect," he said. Margaret Rutledge survived. She woke up 3 hours later in pain but alive. The tumor was gone. The wound healed cleanly. Her husband paid Hartwell and Pierce $300, a fortune. Hartwell gave Nathan nothing, not even acknowledgement. But Nathan had gained something. He had learned that his hands could enter the bodies of Charleston's elite, that he could touch their organs, hold their lives in his fingers. And they would never know. They would never look at him closely enough to realize who he really was, what he really was. Between 1852 and 1858, Nathan operated on over 200 white patients. Judges, plantation owners, merchants, their wives, their children. He removed tumors, repaired hernias, set broken bones, delivered babies, saved lives. He also began to notice things, small things, like the fact that he could make mistakes that would not be noticed until later. He could tie a suture slightly too loose, use thread that would dissolve too quickly, leave a small piece of tissue that would become infected weeks after the surgery. Small errors that looked like bad luck, like complications, not like sabotage. Nathan never acted on these thoughts, not yet. But they were there, growing, waiting, because Nathan had spent 8 years cutting into people who could not refuse, people who screamed and bled and sometimes died. And now he had access to the people who made that system possible, the people who owned the bodies Nathan practiced on, the people who paid to have their own bodies treated with care and anesthesia and respect, while others got only restraints and screaming. Nathan's hands could reach inside them now, could touch their hearts, their lungs, their intestines, could make choices about who lived and who did not, and they would never know, they would never suspect, because they did not see Nathan as a person. They saw him as a pair of hands, steady hands, skilled hands, hands that could save them or destroy them. Judge Thomas Whitfield had no idea that the hands inside his chest belonged to a slave. He lay unconscious on the operating table in his bedroom on Trad Street, while Nathan removed a tumor from his right lung. It was July 12, 1853. The room smelled like ether and old money. Whitfield's wife waited downstairs with their 3 daughters. Dr. Hartwell stood beside Nathan watching. Dr. Pierce stood on the other side taking notes. But it was Nathan's hands doing the work, Nathan's fingers peeling back the layers of tissue, Nathan's scalpel cutting into the lung, Nathan's needle stitching the organ back together. The tumor came out clean, size of a plum. Nathan dropped it into a metal bowl. He irrigated the wound, checked for bleeding, found none. Began closing the chest cavity layer by layer, ribs, muscle, fascia, skin. His hands moved with the precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Because he had. Not on white people, but the anatomy was the same. The blood was the same. The way tissue tore and bone cracked was exactly the same. Judge Whitfield survived. He woke up 6 hours later, in pain but alive. He paid Hartwell and Pierce $400, a fortune, enough to buy 5 people like Nathan. The judge never asked who actually performed the surgery, never looked closely at the silent man in plain clothes who stood in the corner cleaning instruments. White people did not look at servants. They looked through them, like furniture, like air. Nathan had learned this. In the 2 years since he began operating on white patients, he had learned that invisibility was both his prison and his power. They did not see him, which meant they did not guard themselves against him, did not question his presence in their bedrooms, in their bodies. They trusted Hartwell and Pierce completely, and Hartwell and Pierce trusted Nathan's hands. Between June of 1852 and July of 1854, Nathan operated on 93 white patients. 71 survived. 22 died. Some deaths were inevitable. The patient was too sick, the tumor too large, the infection too advanced. But some deaths were not inevitable. Some deaths happened because Nathan made choices. Small choices, invisible choices. Choices that looked like accidents, but were not. The first time was in December of 1852, 6 months after Nathan began treating white patients. The patient was a man named Robert Calhoun, plantation owner from Beaufort. He owned 247 enslaved people. Nathan knew this because he had asked Hartwell about Calhoun before the surgery. Asked casually, like he was just making conversation. Hartwell told him Calhoun was one of the wealthiest men in South Carolina, that his plantation produced 30,000 pounds of cotton per year, that he treated his property well because it made economic sense. Treated them well? Like property could be treated well. Calhoun needed an appendectomy. Simple procedure. Nathan had done 17 of them. 15 had survived. Calhoun would have been the 16th. Should have been. But when Nathan closed the incision, he tied one suture slightly looser than the others. Just one. The loosest knot would hold for a few days, maybe a week. Then it would slip. The wound would open internally. Bacteria would enter the abdominal cavity. Infection would spread. Calhoun died 9 days later. The infection moved fast. Fever, delirium, organ failure, death. Hartwell and Pierce called it bad luck. These things happened. Surgery was dangerous. No one suspected Nathan. Why would they? He was just the hands, just the tool. Tools do not have intentions. Tools do not make choices. Nathan felt nothing when he heard about Calhoun's death. That was the terrifying part. He expected to feel guilt, horror, some human response to taking a life. But there was nothing. Just a cold satisfaction, like solving a problem, like completing a task. He wondered if this made him a monster. Then he remembered Sarah, remembered her 32 surgeries, remembered carrying her body to the dissection table, remembered the 8 other people who died screaming under his knife while students took notes, remembered the 247 people Calhoun owned. If Nathan was a monster, he had not started that way. He had been made into one, carefully, systematically. Over 10 years of cutting into people who could not refuse. The second death was in March of 1853. A woman named Catherine Beaumont. Her husband owned a rice plantation near Georgetown. Nathan delivered her baby. Healthy boy, 8 pounds. But when Nathan stitched the tear in her perineum, he used thread that would dissolve too quickly. The wound looked fine for 5 days. Then it opened. Infection entered her bloodstream. She died of sepsis on day 12. Her husband mourned. Hartwell and Pierce expressed condolences. No one blamed Nathan. No one even thought of Nathan. He was invisible. The third death was different. That one Nathan did not plan. That one happened because Nathan recognized the patient. It was August of 1853. Hot, humid, the kind of heat that made breathing feel like work. Hartwell told Nathan they were going to the home of Judge Henry Morrison on King Street. Complicated surgery, hernia repair. Morrison was 62. Overweight, high risk. But Hartwell and Pierce had built a reputation for taking difficult cases, for succeeding where others failed. They arrived at the Morrison house at 3 in the afternoon. Nathan entered through the back door carrying the instrument bag. He followed Hartwell and Pierce upstairs to a bedroom, and there on the bed was the judge. lying back against pillows, breathing heavy, sweating. Nathan stopped in the doorway. He knew this man, not personally, but he knew him, had seen him before, 2 years ago, in the courtroom. Nathan had been there with Hartwell, who was testifying as an expert witness in a case about a slave who had been beaten to death by an overseer. The overseer's defense was that the slave had attacked him first, had to defend himself. Hartwell testified that the injuries were consistent with that story. Could have happened that way. Judge Morrison ruled in favor of the overseer. Self-defense, no charges. Case dismissed. Nathan had sat in the back of that courtroom and watched Morrison dismiss the death of a human being like it was a clerical error. Watched him rule that property destruction was a reasonable response to imagined threat. Nathan had watched and felt nothing. Back then, before Calhoun, before Beaumont, before Nathan learned that his hands could do more than just obey. Now Judge Morrison lay on the bed, looking up at Hartwell. "The hernia is quite painful," Morrison said. "I am told you are the best, that you can fix this." "We will do everything we can," Hartwell said. Nathan set up the instruments. Hartwell administered ether. Morrison went unconscious. Hartwell and Pierce positioned themselves on either side of the bed. Nathan made the first incision. The hernia was large. Part of Morrison's intestine had pushed through the abdominal wall. Nathan would have to push it back through, repair the wall, stitch it closed. Standard procedure. He had done this 41 times. 38 had survived. Morrison would have been 39. Nathan pushed the intestine back through the opening, but as he did, he nicked it. Just a small cut, maybe half an inch. Not enough to kill immediately, but enough to leak intestinal contents into the abdominal cavity over the next few days. Enough to cause peritonitis, enough to kill slowly. The nick was small enough that Hartwell did not see it. Pierce did not see it. Nathan stitched the hernia closed the incision, cleaned the wound. Morrison woke up 3 hours later, in pain, but alive. He died 8 days later. The peritonitis moved slowly. Fever, abdominal pain, vomiting. By the time another doctor was called, it was too late. Nothing could be done. Morrison died screaming, just like the people Nathan had operated on at the medical college. The difference was Morrison got ether first, got privacy, got dignity, until the end. Hartwell and Pierce called it a tragic complication. These things happened. The hernia had been severe. Morrison had been old, high-risk patient. No one suspected Nathan. No one looked at the silent man who had held the knife. Nathan went home that night and added a new mark to his notebook. 3 circles, 3 deaths. Calhoun, Beaumont, Morrison. He stared at the circles for a long time, tried to feel something, guilt, horror, anything. But there was only cold satisfaction. He thought about the 247 people Calhoun had owned, wondered if any of them knew their owner had died, wondered if they celebrated, or if they just braced for whoever bought them next. He thought about Catherine Beaumont's husband, about the rice plantation, about the people working in water up to their waists, getting bit by mosquitoes that carried malaria, working until fever killed them. He thought about Judge Morrison in that courtroom, about the overseer walking free, about the dead man whose name Nathan never learned. Property destruction. Case dismissed. Nathan closed the notebook, hid it under his mattress, lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The cold rage that had been growing inside him for years felt different now. It did not feel like rage anymore. It felt like purpose, like direction, like the only form of justice available to him. Over the next 4 years, Nathan operated on 147 more white patients. Most of them lived. Nathan was good at his work, good enough that Hartwell and Pierce became famous. Charleston's finest surgeons. They published papers in medical journals, gave lectures at universities, built a practice that charged enormous fees and delivered miraculous results. And behind it all were Nathan's hands, Nathan's skill, Nathan's knowledge, bought with the screams of people who looked like him, people who died under his knife so he could learn how to save people who owned them. Nathan kept count, in his notebook, under his mattress. Each surgery got a mark. Each death got a circle. By 1858, he had performed 296 surgeries total, 206 on enslaved people, 90 on white people. 47 people had died. 12 of the deaths were enslaved people whose bodies could not survive the experimental procedures. 3 were white people whose deaths Nathan did not cause. Complications, bad luck, inevitable. 19 were white people Nathan killed. 19 deliberate choices. 19 loose sutures. 19 nicked organs. 19 infections that could have been prevented. 19 deaths that looked like accidents, like complications, like bad luck. Nathan never killed indiscriminately. He chose carefully. Plantation owners, judges who ruled against enslaved people in court, men who bragged about their property, women who treated enslaved people like animals. Nathan listened, learned, made decisions, used his hands for the only kind of justice they could deliver. But in April of 1858, something changed. Someone noticed. Not Nathan, not the deaths, but the pattern. A Northern abolitionist doctor named William Hughes visited Charleston to lecture at the medical college. Hughes was invited to observe a surgery. Hartwell agreed. The patient was a prominent merchant. Abdominal tumor, complex procedure. Nathan performed it perfectly. The merchant survived. But after the surgery, Hughes asked to speak with Hartwell privately. Nathan was not present, but Hartwell told him about it later. Told him because Hartwell was concerned, because Hughes had asked questions, uncomfortable questions. Hughes had noticed Nathan, had watched his hands during the surgery, had seen the skill, the precision, and Hughes had also noticed the brand scar on Nathan's wrist. Small, faded, but visible if you looked closely. Hughes had looked closely. Hughes asked Hartwell point blank, "Is that man enslaved?" Hartwell admitted it, explained the arrangement. Nathan was his property, highly trained, valuable, nothing illegal about it. South Carolina law permitted owners to train enslaved people in skilled trades. Nathan was simply a skilled surgical assistant. Hughes was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "That man is more skilled than most surgeons I have trained. How many procedures has he performed?" "Many," Hartwell said, "under my supervision." "On enslaved subjects?" Hughes asked. "In training, yes," Hartwell admitted. Hughes left Charleston 3 days later. But before he left, he wrote a letter to a medical journal in Philadelphia, described what he had seen, called it barbaric, unethical, an abomination, said that enslaved people were being used as human experiments, that a trained surgical assistant was being used as a medical instrument, that the practice should be investigated and ended. The letter was published in June. It caused a scandal, not in Charleston, in the North. Abolitionists used it as evidence of Southern brutality. Medical ethics boards debated the issue. Newspapers wrote editorials. In Charleston, the response was different: denial, defense. Hartwell and Pierce published a response saying Hughes had misunderstood that Nathan was simply an assistant, that all procedures were performed under strict supervision, that enslaved subjects volunteered for training procedures in exchange for medical care they could not otherwise afford. The response was accepted. The scandal faded. No investigation was opened. But Hartwell was worried. He told Nathan that things had to change, that they needed to be more careful, that Nathan could no longer assist with white patients. Too risky. If Hughes had noticed, others might notice too. So, in July of 1858, Nathan's access to white patients ended. He was returned to the medical college full-time, back to experimental surgeries, back to screaming, back to enslaved people strapped to tables. Nathan had killed 19 white people in 6 years. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something, some small measure of balance in a system designed to be unbalanced. And then, in August of 1858, something else happened. Something Nathan did not plan. Something that would change everything. Hartwell died. Heart attack. Sudden. He was working in his study when he collapsed. Dead before he hit the floor. 57 years old. Nathan found him. Called for help. Watched the doctor confirm what was obvious. Hartwell was gone. The funeral was 4 days later. Nathan attended. Stood in the back. Invisible as always. Watched Charleston's elite mourn a respected physician. Watched Pierce give a eulogy. Watched Hartwell's family weep. And then Nathan learned something that should not have surprised him, but somehow did. Hartwell's will was read 2 weeks after the funeral. Nathan was mentioned as property, appraised value of $2,000, to be sold along with the rest of the estate. The buyer was already arranged, Professor Pierce, who would keep Nathan at the medical college, keep using his hands, keep taking credit for his skill. Nathan had spent 14 years cutting into people, had killed 31 of them, 12 accidentally while learning, 19 deliberately while teaching himself that his hands could deliver something that looked like justice. And at the end of those 14 years, he was worth $2,000. The same as a good horse, less than a productive field hand. The transfer happened in September. Nathan moved from Hartwell's house to housing near the medical college. His new room was smaller, darker, but it had the same lock on the door, the same window that looked out at a city that did not see him, the same notebook under the mattress where he kept count of the bodies. Nathan was 37 years old. He had been cutting people open since he was 23. He had learned anatomy, physiology, surgical technique, Latin medical terminology. He could diagnose conditions most trained physicians would miss, could perform procedures that would kill patients in less skilled hands, could save lives, or end them, depending on what he decided. And he was still property, still invisible, still just a pair of hands. That was when Nathan stopped counting surgeries, stopped making marks in the notebook, stopped trying to balance the scales, because the scales could not be balanced. The system was not designed for balance. It was designed for extraction, for using people up and discarding them, for turning human beings into tools. Nathan had been a tool for 14 years, had tried to make the tool do something other than what it was designed for, had tried to turn cutting into justice. But tools do not deliver justice. They just cut. And in the end, Nathan was still holding the knife, still waiting for someone to tell him where to cut next. The documents were found in 1921, 63 years after Nathan stopped counting. A demolition crew tearing down the old medical college building on Queen Street discovered them behind a bricked-up wall in the basement. Boxes, crates, filing cabinets, surgical records dating back to 1844. Most records were signed by Hartwell, Pierce, Dawson. But mixed in were pages in different handwriting, careful script, precise notes, detailed observations about surgical techniques never published. The handwriting matched requisition forms signed by an enslaved man named Nathan. The record showed he had assisted in over 400 surgeries between 1844 and 1865. But the word assisted was misleading. The note showed Nathan had performed most of those surgeries himself. When medical historians examined the documents, they caused a scandal, not because of what Nathan had done, because of what had been done to create him. The experimental surgeries on enslaved people, the practice procedures that killed subjects who had no choice. But beneath the official outrage was something else. A small notebook tucked inside one of the filing cabinets. Tally marks, circles, names. The notebook listed 19 white patients, 19 deaths that looked like accidents, complications, bad luck. The notebook was examined, photographed by one historian, then quietly destroyed. The official reason was lack of authentication. The real reason was the names. Judges, plantation owners, merchants, people whose descendants still held power in Charleston in 1921. But the photographs survived, made by Dr. Eleanor Ashford, a professor of medical history. She tried to publish her findings. Every medical journal rejected it. Too controversial, not relevant to modern practice. Dr. Ashford kept the photographs, donated them to a university archive before she died in 1952. They sat forgotten for 70 years until a graduate student found them in 2022. That discovery happened in the future. In February of 1865, Nathan was still alive, still property, still waiting. When Union forces entered Charleston on February 18, 1865, Nathan walked out of the medical college at dawn. For the first time in 43 years, nobody told him where to go. He stood on the front steps. The building looked the same. Charleston looked the same. But the laws that had defined his existence had stopped existing overnight. Nathan started walking. Down Queen Street, past shuttered shops, past houses where white families were packing to flee. A black woman passed him on the sidewalk. She was walking in the center, not pressed against buildings, not making space. Nathan watched her until she turned a corner. Then he kept walking, just walking, because he could. Freedom did not feel like relief. It felt like vertigo, like standing at the edge of something vast with no idea how to cross it. Nathan had imagined this moment for decades, had killed 19 people partly because he thought freedom might come. But now that it was here, he felt only emptiness. 43 years of being property had carved out something inside him that freedom could not fill. Professor Pierce had fled 3 days before Union forces arrived, left Charleston without a word, without taking Nathan, just gone. The medical college was abandoned. The operating theater sat empty. Instruments still in their cabinets. The tables still stained. Nathan had spent 14 years in that room, had cut into 412 people there, had become something that should not have existed. And now it was just an empty room. Nathan stayed in Charleston for 6 months, found work at a hospital established by the Union Army to treat wounded soldiers and freed people. They needed surgeons. Nathan told them he had experience, told them the truth. Over 400 surgeries, trained by Charleston's finest doctors, knowledge that exceeded most medical school graduates. They did not believe him. A black man with no credentials, no degree, no documentation, just an impossible claim. They gave him work as an orderly, cleaning instruments, changing bandages. The real surgeries were performed by white doctors, trained doctors, credentialed doctors. Nathan did the work without complaint, but he watched. On his third day at the hospital, he watched a white surgeon operate on a wounded soldier. Shrapnel in the abdomen. Standard removal. Nathan stood in the corner, holding a tray of clean instruments. The surgeon cut too deep. Nathan saw it immediately. The blade angled wrong, going to nick the intestine. Nathan opened his mouth, closed it. Who would listen? He was an orderly. The surgeon cut. The intestine tore. A small perforation, maybe a quarter inch. Not immediately fatal, but enough to leak contents into the abdominal cavity. The surgeon did not notice. Finished the procedure. Closed the incision. The soldier thanked him. 3 days later, the soldier developed fever. 4 days later, his abdomen swelled hard. 5 days later, he was delirious. 8 days later, he died of peritonitis. Nathan had known it would happen, had seen the perforation, had recognized the trajectory, but said nothing, because 43 years of being property had taught him that his voice did not matter, even when he was right, even when someone was dying. After 6 months, Nathan left Charleston, took what money he had earned, and bought a train ticket to Philadelphia. He had heard about the Institute for Colored Youth, a hospital that trained black doctors. That might believe what he knew. The institute was small, 6 students, 2 instructors, limited resources. Nathan arrived in November of 1865 and introduced himself to the director, Dr. James McCune Smith, one of the first African Americans to earn a medical degree. Had studied in Scotland because no American school would accept him. Nathan told his story without embellishment. 14 years performing surgeries, 412 procedures, trained by forced experience on people who could not refuse, then used to operate on Charleston's elite, who never knew what he was. Dr. Smith listened, did not interrupt. When Nathan finished, Dr. Smith asked one question. "Show me." They went to the medical training room. Small space, 1 table, cabinet of instruments. Dr. Smith brought a cadaver, told Nathan to perform any procedure. Nathan chose an appendectomy. He had done it 34 times, 17 on enslaved people, 17 on white patients. Nathan worked for 37 minutes. Didn't speak, didn't explain, just cut. Isolated the appendix cleanly, removed it without damaging surrounding tissue, closed the incision with sutures so precise they looked like they had been measured. When he finished, Dr. Smith examined every cut, every closure. "Where did you really learn this?" Dr. Smith asked. "Charleston," Nathan said. "They bought me, used me to practice on people who could not say no, then used me to cut into people who would have refused if they knew. I learned because they needed me to learn, because their reputations depended on surgeries I performed while they took credit." Dr. Smith was quiet. Then, "You are better than most surgeons I have trained. If you are willing to teach, we need you." Nathan stayed at the Institute for Colored Youth for 12 years, taught surgical technique to 43 students. But teaching was different from operating. The first time Nathan stood before students, he felt his hands start to shake, not from nervousness, from memory. He looked at the table and saw Clara, saw Sarah, saw all the people who had screamed while he cut. The first student Nathan taught was a young man named Thomas Ward, 24 years old, nervous, eager, terrified of making mistakes. Nathan placed a scalpel in Ward's hand. Ward's fingers trembled. "Steady," Nathan said quietly. "The knife follows your intention. If you hesitate, the cut hesitates." Ward pressed the blade against the cadaver. His hand shook. Nathan placed his hand over the student's, guided it. The cut opened clean. Ward looked up at Nathan. "How did you learn to be so steady?" Ward asked. Nathan was silent for a moment. Then, "Practice. More practice than anyone should have." Over 12 years, Nathan passed his knowledge to 43 students. Most went on to open practices in underserved communities, treated people who had never had access to medical care, saved lives that would have been lost. And they existed because Nathan taught them, because he transformed knowledge bought with screaming into skill that healed. But Nathan never spoke publicly about Charleston. When students asked about his training, he said he had worked in field hospitals during the war, gained experience through necessity. It was not entirely false. He had gained experience through necessity, just not the kind people wanted to imagine. In 1877, Nathan's hands began to shake, not occasionally, constantly. Enough that he could not hold a scalpel steady, could not trust himself to cut into living tissue. He was 55 years old, had been cutting since he was 23. 32 years. His hands had done what they were designed to do. Now they were worn out. Nathan left the institute, moved to a small house outside Philadelphia, lived quietly, read medical journals, watched as surgical techniques evolved, as anesthesia became standard, as infection control improved, watched the profession he had helped build move forward without ever acknowledging he had been part of it. He died in 1894, 72 years old. The obituary identified him as Nathan Freeman, former teacher at the Institute for Colored Youth, respected community member, no mention of Charleston, no mention of 412 surgeries, no mention of 47 people who died under his knife, no mention of 19 he killed deliberately. Nathan was buried in Eden Cemetery in Philadelphia. Simple gravestone, just his name and dates. No epitaph. Because how do you summarize a life like that in words carved in stone? The 43 students Nathan trained became doctors. They trained others, built a legacy that continues in hospitals and clinics where descendants of enslaved people provide care to communities once denied it. That legacy exists because Nathan chose to teach instead of disappearing, chose to pass on what he knew even though he had every reason to let it die with him. The other legacy exists too. 19 deliberate deaths in families who never knew why their ancestor died after routine surgery. In gaps in Charleston's records where deaths were called complications instead of choices. In the system that made those deaths possible by creating someone with deadly skill and no power except the power to use it invisibly. Both legacies are Nathan's. Both are true. History tried to erase him, bricked up the records, destroyed the notebook, buried the story. But the photograph survived, and now his story exists again, not as justification, not as condemnation, just as what happens when you turn a person into a weapon and then act surprised when the weapon cuts.